the iron brand pressed against Sara Winchester's left shoulder blade with a searing kiss that made her scream into the leather bit they had forced between her teeth. And in that moment of blinding agony, she understood that Horace Drummond truly believed he owned her soul along with the 7 years remaining on her contract. The summer heat of Circleville, Utah in 1878 felt like nothing compared to the fire that permanently marked her skin, branding her as property, as livestock, as something less than human. She collapsed onto the dirt floor of the barn when they finally released her arms, her cotton dress soaked with sweat and blood where the heated metal had burned through the thin fabric. Drummond stood above her, a thick man with graying whiskers and eyes like chips of flint, holding the brand with its cruel letter D still smoking in the stifling air. "That will teach you to think about running," he said, his voice flat and emotionless as he handed the brand to his foreman. "7 more years, girl. 7 more years of cooking, cleaning, and doing whatever else I say. You signed that contract when your parents died and left you with nothing but debts. I paid good money for your services, and I will get every cent worth." Sara could not speak through the pain. She lay curled on her side, her whole body trembling, feeling the burn throb and pulse with each heartbeat. She had been 17 when the cholera took her parents during the outbreak that swept through their wagon train. Alone and desperate in Salt Lake City, with nowhere to go and creditors demanding payment for her father's business debts, she had signed the indentured servitude contract that Drummond offered. 7 years of domestic service in exchange for room, board, and the clearance of all debts. It had seemed like survival at the time. She had not known that survival could feel worse than death. The foreman and the other ranch hand left the barn, following Drummond back toward the main house. Sara lay alone in the hay and dirt, tears streaming down her face, feeling the horrible burned wound on her back that would scar her forever. She was 19 now, with 5 years already served and 7 more stretching before her like an endless desert. Drummond had changed the contract 6 months ago, adding years as punishment for what he called insubordination when she had refused his advances. He had a lawyer in town who had witnessed his alterations, making them legal and binding. She was trapped. Hours passed before she could move. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red through the barn's open door. Sara pushed herself up slowly, biting back whimpers of pain, and stumbled toward the water trough outside. She needed to clean the wound before infection set in. The ranch sprawled across the valley floor, a collection of buildings that included the main house, 2 bunkhouses for the ranch hands, the barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Drummond ran cattle and horses, and he ran his people with the same iron fist he used on his animals. She had just reached the trough when she heard horses approaching on the main road. Sara turned, squinting against the lowering sun, and saw 3 riders. They moved with the easy confidence of men who spent their lives in the saddle. As they drew closer, she could make out details. The lead rider sat tall on a buckskin gelding, broad-shouldered and lean, wearing a dusty black hat and a blue shirt faded from many washings. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with several days of beard growth. The other 2 riders looked similar, all young men, all cowboys by the way they dressed and carried themselves. The lead rider pulled up his horse near the barn, his eyes taking in the ranch with the assessing gaze of someone who knew what to look for. Then his gaze landed on Sara, and she saw his expression change. She must have looked terrible, her face tear-stained and pale, her dress torn and bloody at the shoulder, her whole body swaying with exhaustion and shock. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and concerned. He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and took a step toward her. "Are you hurt?" Sara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She nodded instead, one hand reaching back unconsciously toward the burning wound. The cowboy's eyes narrowed as he saw the blood on her dress. "What happened?" Before she could answer, Drummond's voice rang out from the porch of the main house. "That is none of your concern, stranger. That girl is my property, and I will handle her as I see fit." The cowboy turned slowly, and Sara saw his hand drop instinctively toward the revolver on his hip before stopping. He looked back at her, then at Drummond, and something cold settled into his features. "Your property." "She is under contract to me for 7 more years of domestic service," Drummond said, walking down from the porch. He moved with the confidence of a man on his own land, surrounded by his own men. "Indentured servitude, all legal and proper. Now state your business or move along." The cowboy stood very still for a long moment. His companions had dismounted as well, flanking him, their faces hard. Finally, he said, "My name is Emmett Dalton. These are my brothers, William and James. We are heading north to Wyoming, looking for ranch work along the way. We heard in town you might be hiring." "I might be," Drummond said, his eyes calculating. "I need men who know cattle and who know how to follow orders without asking questions. Can you do that?" Emmett's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We can do the work." "Good. You can bed down in the second bunkhouse. Supper is at 6. The girl will bring it to you." Drummond jerked his head toward Sara. "Get up to the house and start cooking. We have 3 more mouths to feed now." Sara swayed on her feet. The thought of cooking, of moving, of doing anything except collapsing was almost unbearable, but she knew what would happen if she disobeyed. Drummond would add more time to her contract, or worse. She took a step toward the house and felt her knees buckle. Emmett caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were strong and steady, and for just a moment, Sara felt safe for the first time in years. She looked up into his face and saw eyes the color of dark whiskey, warm and angry and concerned all at once. "She needs a doctor," Emmett said, his voice tight. "She needs to do her job," Drummond snapped. "Put her down. She has been burned badly. She cannot work like this." "That is not your concern. Put her down or find work elsewhere." Emmett held Sara for another long moment, and she could feel the tension in his body, the struggle between what he wanted to do and what he could do. Finally, very gently, he set her on her feet, keeping one hand on her arm to steady her. He leaned close and whispered, "I will help you. I promise." Then he stepped back, and Sara forced herself to walk toward the house on trembling legs. She could feel his eyes on her back, feel the weight of his promise, and something inside her that had been dead for 2 years flickered back to life. Hope. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and automatic motion. Sara prepared supper in the big kitchen, her hands moving through familiar tasks while her mind floated somewhere outside her body. She made biscuits and fried salt pork and boiled potatoes and carrots. She set the table in the main house for Drummond and his foreman, then loaded a tray to carry to the bunkhouse for the new hired men. The sun had set by the time she crossed the yard, and the evening air had cooled. Lantern light glowed in the windows of the second bunkhouse. Sara climbed the steps carefully, balancing the heavy tray, and knocked with her elbow. The door opened immediately. Emmett stood there, and behind him she could see his brothers. They all had the same dark hair and strong features, clearly family, though Emmett was the tallest and broadest. William looked to be about Emmett's age, perhaps 25 or 26, while James seemed younger, maybe 22. "Come in," Emmett said, taking the tray from her hands before she could protest. He set it on the rough wooden table in the center of the room. "Sit down. You look ready to fall over." "I cannot," Sara said quietly. I have to get back. There are dishes to wash and the kitchen to clean and tomorrow's bread to start, and sit down, Emmett repeated, his voice gentle but firm. He pulled out one of the chairs and guided her into it. Then he knelt in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "Let me see your back." Sara hesitated. The wound was on her left shoulder blade, visible only if she pulled down the torn dress. It felt too intimate, too vulnerable. But the pain was getting worse, not better, and she could feel heat radiating from the burn that suggested infection was already setting in. "Please," Emmett said. "I have some medical supplies. I worked as an assistant to an army doctor for 6 months when I was younger. I know how to treat burns." Sara looked into his eyes and saw only honest concern. Slowly, she turned in the chair and pulled the torn fabric away from the wound. She heard Emmett's sharp intake of breath. "Jesus," William muttered from across the room. "He branded you," Emmett said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Like a cow." Sara said nothing. What was there to say? Emmett stood and went to his saddlebags, pulling out a small leather case. He returned with clean cloth, a bottle of whiskey and a small tin of salve. "This is going to hurt," he warned, "but we need to clean it and treat it properly." The whiskey burned like fire all over again, and Sara bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. Emmett worked quickly and efficiently, his hands surprisingly gentle for such a large man. He cleaned the wound, applied the salve, and bandaged it with strips of clean cloth. Through it all, he kept up a low, steady stream of words, telling her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the farm his father had owned before the war. "We lost everything," he said as he tied off the bandage. "Father died at Shiloh. Mother died of grief 6 months later. We have been drifting since then, working ranches, saving money, hoping to buy our own place someday. Wyoming has good land, good grass. We figured we would try our luck up there." "Why did you take work here?" Sara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "After what you saw," Emmett moved around to face her again. He crouched down so he could meet her eyes. "Because of what I saw, I cannot leave you here with that man. We will figure something out." "There is nothing to figure out. I am bound by legal contract. If I run, he will hunt me down and drag me back, and the law will be on his side. The law cannot condone branding a human being. The law does not care what happens to indentured servants, especially women. I signed the contract. I owe the debt. I belong to him until it is paid." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Emmett shook his head slowly. "Nobody belongs to anyone. That kind of thinking died with the war." "Not here," Sara said. "Not for people like me." She stood carefully, testing her balance. The bandage helped. The pain was still there, but more manageable now. "I have to get back. Thank you for your help." Emmett stood as well. He reached out and caught her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "What is your name?" "Sara. Sara Winchester." "Sara Winchester." He said it like he was memorizing it, imprinting it on his heart. "I meant what I said. I will help you." Sara wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it made her chest ache, but she had learned that hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment led to despair. So she simply nodded and pulled her hand free and walked back out into the night. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. Sara rose before dawn to start breakfast, worked through the long hot days cooking and cleaning and tending to the endless needs of the household, and collapsed into her narrow bed in the attic, each night too exhausted to dream. But now there was a difference. Now there was Emmett. He found reasons to be near the house throughout the day. He would stop by the kitchen door asking for water or food for the men working in the far pastures. He always had a kind word, a smile, a moment of conversation that made Sara feel like a person instead of property. He checked her bandages every evening when she brought supper to the bunkhouse, his hands gentle and careful, his anger at Drummond simmering just below the surface. "It is healing well," he said one evening, a week after he arrived. "You were lucky. It could have gotten infected." "I am not sure luck has anything to do with my life," Sara said, but she smiled as she said it. Emmett had a way of making her smile even when everything seemed hopeless. "Tell me about before," he said, sitting down across from her at the table. His brothers had gone to the other bunkhouse for a card game, leaving them alone. "Before the contract, what was your life like?" Sara thought back to a time that seemed impossibly distant now. "Happy," she said finally. "My parents and I were traveling west to start a new life in California. Father was a carpenter, skilled at furniture making. He wanted to open a shop in San Francisco. Mother was from Boston, educated proper. She taught me to read and write and do sums. She taught me poetry and music. We had a piano back in Philadelphia that she played beautifully. What happened? Cholera. It swept through the wagon train like wildfire. Half of us died. My parents got sick the same day, within hours of each other. They were gone before I could even understand what was happening. And then I discovered that father had borrowed money to pay for the journey, money he expected to repay once he established his business in California. The creditors wanted immediate payment. I had nothing. I was alone in a strange city with no family, no money, no prospects. When Drummond offered the contract, it seemed like my only choice. Did you know what he was like? No. He seemed like a successful rancher, respectable. I thought I would work as a housekeeper for 7 years and then be free to make my own life. I did not know he would. She trailed off, touching her shoulder reflexively. Emmett's jaw tightened. "Where is the contract? Where does he keep it?" "In his office in the main house. In a safe behind the painting of his dead wife." "Why?" "Just curious." But there was something in his eyes, something calculating and determined. Sara leaned forward. "Do not do anything foolish. If you cross him, he will have you arrested or worse. He has connections in town, friends in the territorial government. You cannot fight him." "Maybe not directly," Emmett said, "but there is always a way." Over the next 2 weeks, Sara watched as Emmett became a model employee. He worked harder than anyone else on the ranch, was first to volunteer for difficult tasks, never complained, and showed remarkable skill with horses and cattle. Even Drummond grudgingly admitted the Dalton brothers were good hires. Emmett used this trust to slowly learn the rhythms of the household, when people came and went, where keys were kept, which windows were left unlocked at night. Sara knew what he was planning even though he never spoke of it directly. He was going to try to get the contract. The thought terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. If he succeeded, she could be free. If he failed, both of them would face consequences she could not bear to imagine. Late one night in early September, Sara was finishing the dishes when she heard a soft tap on the kitchen door. She opened it to find Emmett standing in the shadows, his face serious. "Tomorrow night," he whispered. "Drummond is going into town for a Cattlemen's Association meeting. He will not be back until late. The foreman is planning to go to the saloon. Most of the ranch hands will go with him. It will just be you and old Pete watching the place, and Pete is half deaf and falls asleep by 9 every night." Sara's heart began to pound. "What are you going to do?" "Get your contract, destroy it, get you out of here. He will come after me, after us. Let him try. We will be long gone. I have been saving money for 5 years, Sara. I have enough to get us to Wyoming to buy a small piece of land to start over. Come with me, please." Sara looked at him standing there in the moonlight, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers. She had been too afraid to speak. She barely knew him, but she knew the important things. She knew he was kind and brave and honest. She knew he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth saving. She knew that staying meant 7 more years of slavery, 7 more years of Drummond's cruelty, 7 more years of death in life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will come with you." Emmett's face broke into a smile that transformed him, made him look younger and lighter. He reached through the doorway and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I will not let you down. I swear it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows, and Sara was left alone with her racing heart and her terrifying hope. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sara went through her tasks mechanically, her mind spinning with plans and fears. She packed a small bundle of her few possessions and hid it under her bed. She made sure she wore her sturdiest dress and her best shoes. She tried to act normal around Drummond at breakfast and supper, though she could barely choke down any food herself. Evening finally came. Drummond left for town at 6, dressed in his best suit, driving his buggy. The foreman and most of the ranch hands rode out an hour later, whooping and laughing, looking forward to whiskey and cards. Sara cleaned up from supper, washed the dishes, and waited. 9 o'clock came. Then 9:30. Sara stood in the dark kitchen, her bundle clutched in her hands, listening to the silence of the house. Old Pete was asleep in his chair on the front porch, his snores audible even from here. A soft sound made her turn. Emmett stood in the doorway, and even in the darkness she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Ready?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. "Wait here. I need to get the contract first." He moved through the house like a ghost, his footsteps silent on the wooden floors. Sara waited, counting her heartbeats, barely breathing. Minutes stretched like hours. Then she heard it, a soft click followed by the creak of a door opening. More silence. Then Emmett was back, holding a folded paper in his hand. "I've got it," he said. "Let's go." They slipped out the back door and across the dark yard. William and James were waiting with 4 horses already saddled. They had packed supplies and loaded them onto the spare horse. Everything was ready. "Can you ride?" Emmett asked Sara. "I learned as a child, but it has been years." "You can ride with me then. It will be faster." He swung up into the saddle of his buckskin gelding and reached down for her. Sara took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Let's ride," Emmett said. They left the ranch at a gallop, heading north into the darkness. The night air was cool against Sara's face, and above them the stars spread across the sky in a brilliant cascade. She held tight to Emmett and felt the contract papers crinkle in his shirt pocket against her cheek. They rode for hours, pushing the horses hard, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Drummond's ranch. When they finally stopped to rest near midnight, they were high in the mountains, following a narrow trail through pine forests. A small stream trickled nearby, and the air smelled of evergreen and stone. Emmett helped Sara down from the horse. Her legs were shaky from the long ride, and her back ached where the brand had scarred, but she was grinning. They had done it. They had actually done it. "Let me see the contract," she said. Emmett pulled the folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. Sara opened it carefully, her hands trembling. There it was, her signature at the bottom, her life reduced to legal language about terms of service and debt repayment. 7 more years of servitude, signed and witnessed. "Give it to me," Emmett said. He had built a small fire while his brothers tended the horses. Now he held out his hand for the contract. Sara passed it to him. Emmett looked at it for a long moment, his face hard in the firelight. Then, very deliberately, he tore the paper in half, and in half again. And again, until it was nothing but scraps. He held the pieces over the fire and let them fall, one by one, into the flames. They caught immediately, the paper curling and blackening, the ink running and disappearing. Sara watched her contract burn, watched 7 years of slavery turn to ash and smoke, and she felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of relief, of joy, of freedom. When the last piece had burned away, Emmett turned to her. "You are free, Sara Winchester. Nobody owns you. Nobody ever will again." Sara could not speak. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest, letting herself cry in earnest now. Emmett held her close, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort. "Thank you," she finally managed to whisper. "Thank you. You do not need to thank me. This is what should have happened from the start. Nobody should be owned." William came over with cups of coffee and some dried beef. "We should keep moving at first light," he said. "Drummond will discover you gone when he gets back tonight. He will come after you." "Let him," James added, his young face fierce. "We will be ready." They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch, and set out again before dawn. The next days blurred together, a constant movement north and west, following mountain trails and avoiding main roads. They saw no sign of pursuit, but they did not slow down. Emmett seemed to know the land well, finding water and good camping spots, keeping them moving at a steady pace. As they traveled, Sara and Emmett talked. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures, opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Sara discovered that Emmett was surprisingly well read, that his mother had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, and had made sure all her sons could read and write and think clearly. She discovered that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh, and a protective streak that made her feel safe. Emmett discovered that Sara was stronger than she looked, that she could ride all day without complaining, that she could help set up camp and cook over an open fire and keep up with his long-legged stride when they walked. He discovered that she was smart and funny and brave, and that her smile made his heart do strange things in his chest. One evening, about a week into their journey, they made camp in a small meadow surrounded by aspen trees. The leaves were beginning to turn gold, and the setting sun painted everything in warm amber light. William and James had gone to check snares they had set earlier, leaving Sara and Emmett alone by the fire. "Can I ask you something?" Sara said, watching the flames dance. "Anything." "Why did you do it? Why did you risk so much for a stranger?" Emmett was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "My mother," he said finally. "She had a sister, my Aunt Elizabeth. When my mother was young, Aunt Elizabeth got into trouble. She borrowed money she could not repay. A man offered her a contract, promised to clear her debts if she would work for him for 5 years. She signed it. He treated her like a slave, worked her to death, literally. She died 2 years into the contract. My mother never forgave herself for not helping, for not stopping it somehow. She made us promise, my brothers and me, that if we ever saw someone trapped like that, we would help, that we would not stand by and do nothing. I am sorry about your aunt, so am I, but maybe her death was not meaningless if it led to your freedom." Sara reached over and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, not needing words. That night, as Sara lay in her bedroll looking up at the stars, she realized she was falling in love with Emmett Dalton. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, inevitable, like something that had been written in the stars long before they met. They crossed into Wyoming territory 2 weeks after leaving Drummond's ranch. The landscape changed, becoming more open, with rolling grasslands and distant mountains. They stopped in a small town called Green River to resupply, and Emmett asked around about land for sale. "There is a place about 20 miles northeast of here. the general store owner told them. Old homestead, about 160 acres. The family that was working it gave up last winter and moved on. It is good land, good water. The bank owns it now. They are looking to sell. The next day they rode out to see the property. It was everything the store owner had promised. A small log cabin stood in a sheltered valley, with a barn that needed repairs, good grassland, a creek running through the property, and mountains rising to the west. It was beautiful and isolated and perfect. "What do you think?" Emmett asked Sara, dismounting and helping her down. Sara walked through the overgrown yard, looking at the cabin, the barn, the land stretching away in all directions. She could picture it, could see what it could become with work and time and care. "I think it is wonderful," Emmett grinned. "Then let's buy it." The negotiations took 3 days. Emmett had saved more money than Sara had realized, nearly $400 earned from years of ranch work. The bank wanted $300 for the property. They settled on $275, and just like that, Emmett Dalton owned 160 acres in Wyoming. They moved in immediately, all 4 of them working to make the place livable. They repaired the roof, cleaned out years of accumulated dirt and debris, fixed the barn door, and started repairs on the corral. It was hard work, physical and exhausting, but Sara had never been happier. This was not slavery. This was building something, creating a home, making a future. As September turned to October, the work continued. They bought supplies in town, including seeds for next spring's planting, chickens, and 2 pigs. William and James talked about staying through the winter and then possibly finding their own land nearby. The cabin was crowded with all 4 of them, but they made it work, hanging a blanket to give Sara some privacy in the corner that became her space. One evening, after a long day of cutting firewood for the coming winter, Emmett asked Sara to take a walk with him. They followed the creek upstream, walking in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains. When they reached a small waterfall where the creek tumbled over a shelf of rock, Emmett stopped and turned to face her. "Sara, I need to tell you something. I need to be honest about my feelings." Sara's heart began to pound. "All right. I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing by that water trough, beaten but not broken. I love your strength and your courage and your kindness. I love the way you laugh and the way you think and the way you make me want to be a better man. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you might need time, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that this is not just about helping someone in trouble. You are not a responsibility or a duty. You are everything to me." Sara felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Emmett. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you cleaned my wound and promised to help me. You gave me back my life. You gave me hope. You gave me a future." "How could I not love you?" Emmett pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was Sara's first real kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Marry me," Emmett said. "Make this official. Build this life with me, not as someone I rescued, but as my partner, my equal, my wife." "Yes," Sara said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in Green River, in a small church with William and James as witnesses and the minister's wife playing piano. Sara wore a new dress, simple blue cotton that Emmett had bought her in town, and she carried wildflowers that she had picked that morning. Emmett wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed, his face clean shaven for the occasion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett kissed Sara in front of God and everyone, and Sara felt happiness bloom in her chest like a flower opening to the sun. They returned to the homestead that evening, to find that William and James had decorated the cabin with more wildflowers, and had prepared a celebration supper. They ate and drank and laughed, and when William pulled out a harmonica and started to play, Sara found herself dancing in her husband's arms for the first time. That night, after William and James had discreetly retreated to the barn, Emmett carried Sara over the threshold of the cabin. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure about this? About me?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." They made love slowly, carefully, Emmett mindful of her inexperience and the scar on her back. He was gentle and patient and loving, and Sara discovered a whole new kind of freedom in his arms, a way of giving and receiving that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with love. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl. Sara traced patterns on Emmett's chest with her fingertips, marveling at the fact that this was real, that this was her life now. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. "Get used to it," Emmett said, kissing the top of her head, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay this way." Winter came early that year. By November, snow was falling regularly, and they were snowed in for days at a time. But the cabin was warm and tight, their stores of food were adequate, and they had each other. William and James eventually decided to stay through the winter, and the four of them settled into a comfortable routine. The men hunted and tended the animals and did repairs. Sara cooked and mended and kept house, but now it was her house, her choice, her life. As Christmas approached, Sara realized she was pregnant. She told Emmett on Christmas morning, giving him the news wrapped in the gift of her joy. Emmett picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down carefully as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A family of our own. Are you happy?" "Happy, Sara, I am beyond happy. I am blessed." William and James were equally excited, already planning to spoil their future niece or nephew. They started building a cradle by the fire on winter evenings, carving it from pine and sanding it smooth. The winter months passed in contentment. Sara's pregnancy progressed normally, and she bloomed despite the cold and the isolation. She and Emmett grew closer every day, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building the kind of partnership that came from genuine love and respect. It was in late February when their peace was shattered. Sara was in the cabin alone, the men out checking on the cattle, when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. Horace Drummond sat on his horse in the yard, and he was not alone. He had brought 5 men with him, all armed. Sara's first instinct was to hide, but there was nowhere to go. She stood frozen as Drummond dismounted and walked toward the cabin. He did not knock, just pushed the door open and walked in like he owned the place. "Well, well," he said, his eyes cold. "Mrs. Dalton, I believe. Or are you still just my runaway servant girl playing house?" "Get out," Sara said, her voice shaking. "You have no right to be here." "I have every right. You broke a legal contract. You stole from me 7 years of service that you owe me. The contract is destroyed. I owe you nothing." "The contract may be destroyed, but the debt remains. I have copies, witnessed and notarized. I have the law on my side. And I have patience. I have been tracking you for months, waiting for the right time. I knew I would find you eventually. My husband will never let you take me." "Your husband?" Drummond laughed, an ugly sound. "That marriage is not legal. You cannot marry while under contract. That makes you nothing but his whore." Sara slapped him. The sound rang out in the small cabin, shocking them both. Drummond's face turned red and he raised his hand to strike her back. But before he could, the cabin door slammed open. Emmett stood there, his rifle in his hands, his face murderous. Behind him, William and James were also armed. "Step away from my wife," Emmett said, his voice deadly calm. Drummond lowered his hand but did not move away. "She is not your wife. She is my property and I am taking her back. Like hell you are. I have the law on my side, boy, and I have 5 armed men outside. You have got 2 choices. Hand her over peacefully or die trying to keep her. Either way, she is coming with me." Emmett did not lower his rifle. "There is a third choice. You turn around, get on your horse and ride away. You forget Sara exists. You go back to Utah and you never think about her again. And why would I do that? Because I will kill you if you do not. I will kill you and every man you brought with you. Maybe you will kill me too. Maybe you will kill my brothers, but we will take you with us. Is that worth it? Is 7 years of service from one woman worth your life?" Drummond hesitated. Sara could see him calculating, weighing the odds. He had not expected this level of resistance. He had thought Emmett would back down when faced with legal authority and superior numbers. "You would hang for killing me," Drummond said. "Maybe, but you would still be dead. And I do not think your men are willing to die for your grudge. Are they?" Emmett raised his voice. "You men outside, this is not your fight. Drummond is paying you to back him up, but is he paying you enough to die for him? Because that is what will happen if you try to take my wife. Someone is going to die here today. Make sure you are willing to be that someone before you make your choice." There was a long silence. Then Sara heard one of the horses outside shift and blow. She heard the creak of saddle leather, the jingle of bits. She heard men repositioning, uncertain. "This is ridiculous," Drummond blustered. "She signed a contract. She owes a debt. The law says you cannot brand a human being like livestock," Emmett interrupted. "The law says you cannot hold someone in servitude against their will. The law says a lot of things, Drummond, and I am betting you broke most of them. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave. Now. And if I ever see you near my wife again, if I ever hear that you are looking for her or asking about her, I will come to Utah and I will burn your ranch to the ground with you in it. Do you understand me?" Drummond looked from Emmett to Sara and back again. She could see the rage in his eyes, the desire to reassert his control. But she could also see fear. He was not a brave man. He was a bully, and bullies folded when faced with real resistance. "This is not over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Emmett replied. "It is over because you are going to make it over, because you are going to choose your life over your pride. Walk away, Drummond." Drummond stood there for another long moment. Then, with a curse, he turned and stalked out of the cabin. Sara heard him mount his horse, heard him bark orders at his men. Within minutes, they were riding away, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Emmett finally lowered his rifle. He crossed to Sara and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, I am fine. You came just in time. If he had touched you, but he did not. You stopped him." William and James came into the cabin, and all 4 of them stood together for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Emmett started to laugh, a slightly hysterical sound. "I cannot believe that worked. I thought for sure we were going to have a gunfight." "He is a coward," James said. "All talk, no spine." "Do you think he will come back?" Sara asked. Emmett shook his head. "No, he is done. He knows he cannot win, and he is not willing to die for this. He will go back to Utah and find another victim, someone easier to control. You are safe now, Sara. Truly safe." Sara wanted to believe him, but she could not quite let go of her fear. For days afterward, she jumped at every sound, expecting to see Drummond riding back. But the days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of him. Eventually, Sara began to relax, to believe that maybe it really was over. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, the creek swelled with runoff, and green grass pushed up through the brown earth. Sara's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing round, and Emmett fussed over her constantly. making sure she did not work too hard, making sure she was comfortable. In late April, William and James announced they had found their own piece of land about 10 miles to the north. They would be neighbors, close enough to help each other but far enough to have their own space. They started building their own cabin, though they promised to be back when the baby came. Sarah's labor started on a warm day in early May. It was long and difficult, but Emmett stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. When the baby finally came, a squalling red-faced boy with dark hair and strong lungs, Sarah felt a rush of love so intense it took her breath away. "A son," Emmett said, his voice choked with emotion. He held the tiny baby carefully, looking down at him with wonder. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but happy. "Thomas," Emmett said immediately, "after my father, Thomas Dalton." "Thomas Dalton," Sarah repeated. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." The baby grew healthy and strong. He had Emmett's dark hair and Sarah's blue eyes, and he was adored by everyone who met him. William and James rode over regularly to visit their nephew, bringing gifts and offers to help with the growing workload. As the months passed, the homestead flourished. They planted crops that spring, harvesting their first wheat and vegetables in the fall. They increased their cattle herd, bought more chickens, and added a milk cow. The cabin got additions, a second room and a real sleeping loft. They were building something real and lasting, a legacy for their son and the children Sarah hoped would follow. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah spent her days caring for Thomas, tending the garden, cooking and helping with the endless work that came with running a homestead. Emmett worked from dawn to dusk, ranching, building, improving their land. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch he had built, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Thomas sleeping between them, and talk about their dreams and plans. "I want more," Emmett said one evening. "More children, I mean, if you are willing." Sarah smiled. "I am willing. I want a big family, lots of children running around, filling this place with life and laughter." "How many is lots?" "I do not know. 4, 5, however many we are blessed with." Emmett leaned over and kissed her. "I love you, Sarah Dalton, more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too. You saved my life, Emmett. You gave me everything." "You saved my life too. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something permanent. You gave me a home." Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Emmett's aunt, was born in the spring of 1880. She was followed by another son, Samuel, in 1882, and then twin girls, Rose and Lily, in 1884. The cabin expanded again, becoming a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a real kitchen. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. Sarah watched her children grow, teaching them to read and write, passing on her mother's love of learning. Emmett taught them to ride and rope and work the land. William and James married and had families of their own, creating a small community of Daltons in that corner of Wyoming. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would wake and touch the scar on her shoulder blade, remembering. But the memories had lost their power to hurt. The brand was still there, a permanent reminder of what she had survived, but it no longer defined her. She was not Drummond's property. She was not a victim. She was Sarah Dalton, wife, mother, homesteader, and she was free. By the time their youngest children, the twins, were 5 years old, the homestead had become a small ranch, prosperous and respected in the territory. They had built a real barn, a proper bunkhouse for the hired hands they now employed, and a schoolhouse where Sarah taught not just her own children but the children of neighboring homesteaders. One evening in the summer of 1889, Sarah and Emmett sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 15 now, tall and strong, already doing a man's work on the ranch. Elizabeth was 9, sweet and gentle, always helping with her younger siblings. Samuel was 7, adventurous and bold. And the twins were 6, identical in appearance but completely different in temperament, one quiet and thoughtful, the other loud and energetic. "Look at what we built," Emmett said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Look at what we created." "It is everything I never dared to dream," Sarah said. "When I was at Drummond's ranch when he branded me, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die there, broken and alone. Instead, you lived. We lived. We made something beautiful out of something ugly. You made it beautiful. You gave me the chance." Emmett shook his head. "You were already beautiful, Sarah. You were already strong and brave and worthy. I just helped you see it." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever wonder what happened to him?" "To Drummond, sometimes, but not often. He does not matter anymore. He is part of the past, and we are building the future." "I heard he died," Sarah said quietly. "A few years ago. I heard it from a trader passing through, someone who used to work in Utah. Drummond got sick, some kind of fever. He died alone in his house. No one mourned him. I am not going to pretend I am sorry. Neither am I. I just wanted you to know he cannot hurt me anymore. He is gone, and I am still here, still living, still happy." "More than happy," Emmett said. "You are loved, Sarah. By me, by our children, by everyone who knows you. You are cherished." Sarah turned and kissed him, a long, slow kiss that still made her heart race even after 11 years of marriage. "And you are my hero, Emmett Dalton. My knight in dusty cowboy clothes who rode in and saved me from the dragon." "I like that, though I think William would argue he was equally heroic. William helped, but you were the one who tore up that contract. You were the one who burned it. Best thing I ever did. Well, second best." "What was the best, marrying you?" "That was definitely the best thing I ever did." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Sarah could hear the children getting ready for bed, their voices raised in laughter and argument. It was a good sound, a sound of life and family and home. "I want to grow old with you," Emmett said suddenly. "I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on this porch when we are 80 and tell stories about the old days. I want a lifetime with you, Sarah. As many years as God will give us." "You will have it," Sarah promised. "We will have it. We survived everything that tried to break us. We will survive the years too, growing old together, watching our legacy spread out into the future." "Tell me something," Emmett said. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still get on that wagon train west? Would you still take the risk that led to all of this?" Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about her parents dying, about the desperate poverty, about Drummond and the contract and the branding iron. She thought about the pain and the fear and the hopelessness. But then she thought about Emmett appearing in her life like a miracle. She thought about the night he tore up her contract and burned it. She thought about their wedding, about the birth of each of their children, about every sunrise and sunset they had shared. She thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, moment by moment, out of ashes and hope. "Yes," she said finally. "I would do it all again, because it led me here to you, to this life. The pain was worth it. Every moment of it was worth it to end up here." Emmett pulled her closer, and they sat together under the stars, husband and wife, partners and lovers, survivors and builders. They had taken the worst that life could throw at them and transformed it into something beautiful. They had taken hate and made it into love, taken slavery and made it into freedom, taken despair and made it into hope. And in the years that followed, they continued to do just that. They raised their children to be strong and kind and free. They expanded their ranch, hired workers whom they treated with fairness and respect, became pillars of their community. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, Emmett was there to vote for the first time, and Sara, in a state that gave women the right to vote, stood beside him and cast her ballot as well. Thomas grew up to be a rancher like his father, eventually taking over the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Elizabeth became a teacher, opening a school in Green River. Samuel went east to college, becoming a lawyer who specialized in fighting for the rights of workers and the disadvantaged. The twins both married local boys and stayed close to home, building houses on parcels of land that Emmett and Sara gave them. As the new century approached, Sara and Emmett found themselves becoming grandparents. Thomas married and had 3 children of his own. Elizabeth had 2. Samuel, despite living far away, came home regularly with his growing family. The twins added to the brood, until Sara lost count of how many grandchildren she had. They were not wealthy by the standards of the railroad barons and cattle kings, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. They had built a life based on love and mutual respect, and that foundation had held strong through everything the years threw at them. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children threw them a party. The whole community came, filling their house and spilling out into the yard. There was music and dancing and food and laughter. At one point, Emmett pulled Sara onto the makeshift dance floor and held her close as a fiddle player started a waltz. "You remember our wedding day?" he asked as they swayed together. Every moment of it, you could not stop smiling. I was marrying the woman I loved. Of course I could not stop smiling. We were so young. I was only 19, you were 25. We are not so old now. I am only 51, you are a young 45. Sara laughed. I feel older some days, especially when the grandchildren are all visiting at once. But happy, happier than I ever imagined possible. Good, that is all I ever wanted, to make you happy. You have done so much more than that, Emmett. You gave me my life back. You gave me freedom and love and family. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Emmett corrected. This was not just me saving you. You saved me too, Sara. You made me into the man I wanted to be. You gave me purpose and direction and love. We built this life together, as partners. That is what makes it special. They danced until the music ended, and then they stood together in the middle of the crowd, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, and Sara felt a sense of completeness that was almost overwhelming. This was her life. This was her family. This was her home, and it was all real, all hers, all earned through pain and courage and love. The years continued to pass. Sara and Emmett grew older, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experience, of weathering storms together, of building something lasting. When Emmett turned 70 in 1923, he and Sara took a trip, their first real vacation in decades. They traveled by train to San Francisco, the city Sara's parents had been heading toward all those years ago. They walked the streets, visited the shops, saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a way of honoring the journey that had brought them together. Standing on the beach, watching the waves roll in, Sara said, "My parents would have loved this. They had such dreams." "You fulfilled their dreams," Emmett said. "Maybe not the way they planned, but you built a good life. You raised children who are making the world better. You created something that will last long after we are gone. That is more than most people can say. I could not have done it without you. And I could not have done it without you. We are a team, Sara. We always have been." They returned home to Wyoming refreshed and happy, ready to settle into their later years. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to Thomas and his sons, though Emmett still rode out to check on the cattle most mornings. Sara continued to teach occasionally and spent her time gardening, reading, and spoiling her ever-growing number of great-grandchildren. In the summer of 1930, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. It was a massive celebration, with family coming from all over the country. Emmett and Sara sat in places of honor, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. When it came time for speeches, Thomas stood up and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, "who taught me what love looks like, who showed me that strength is not about power over others but about lifting others up, who built something beautiful out of nothing but hard work and determination and love. Thank you for everything you have given us. Thank you for the example you have set. Thank you for being the kind of parents and grandparents and great-grandparents that we all aspire to be." Everyone drank to the toast, and Sara felt tears streaming down her face. Emmett squeezed her hand and leaned close to whisper, "We did good, did we not?" "We did better than good," Sara whispered back. "We did amazing." Emmett lived to be 82 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1935, with Sara beside him holding his hand. His last words to her were, "I love you. I will always love you. Wait for me." Sara grieved, but she did not fall apart. She had their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around her, supporting her, loving her. She had a lifetime of memories to sustain her. And she had the knowledge that she and Emmett had lived a full and complete life together, that they had loved each other completely, that they had built something lasting. She lived another 8 years after Emmett's death, remaining active and engaged with her family. She continued to tell stories about the old days, about the Wild West, about a time when things were harder but somehow simpler. She told her great-grandchildren about the night Emmett burned her contract, about how he had given her freedom and love. And she told them about the most important lesson she had learned in her long life, that freedom is precious, that love is powerful, and that no one should ever be owned by anyone else, that every person has value and dignity and the right to make their own choices. That sometimes heroes come when you least expect them, in the form of a dusty cowboy with kind eyes and a brave heart. Sara Winchester Dalton died in her sleep in the spring of 1943 at the age of 84. She was buried next to Emmett on a hill overlooking their ranch, under the big sky they had both loved. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, telling stories and sharing memories, celebrating a life well lived and a love that had lasted more than half a century. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. The house they had built and expanded over the years remained standing, full of children and laughter. And the story of Sara and Emmett was told and retold, becoming family legend, a reminder of where they came from and what they had overcome. In the end, it was a simple story. A young woman in desperate circumstances, a brave man who chose to help, a contract burned in a fire, and a lifetime of love built on the ashes. But simple did not mean unimportant. Their story mattered. It mattered to their children and grandchildren. It mattered to the community they had helped build. It mattered as a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to take something broken and make it whole, to turn suffering into joy. Sara and Emmett's love story became part of the fabric of the land itself, woven into the history of Wyoming. A reminder that even in the hardest times, even when the world seems dark and hopeless, there is always the possibility of salvation. There is always the chance that someone will appear and offer a hand up, that love will conquer hate, that freedom will triumph over slavery. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on portions of that original homestead. The land is still worked, still loved, still cherished. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the prairie, carrying the scent of grass and sage, people say you can almost hear it, the echo of that long-ago moment when a cowboy tore up a contract and threw it into the fire, setting a woman free and starting a love story that would echo through generations. It was a love story for the ages, a tale of courage and sacrifice and redemption. It was a story about two people who found each other when they both needed saving, who built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. It was a story about the Wild West, about a time when the land was hard and the law was uncertain and survival required both strength and heart. But most of all, it was a story about love. Real, lasting, transformative love. The kind of love that saves lives and builds legacies and lasts beyond death itself. The kind of love that Sara Winchester and Emmett Dalton shared, from that first night in the bunkhouse when he bandaged her wounds, through 50 years of marriage, through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through all the joys and sorrows that make up a life fully lived. They had taken the worst that the world could offer and transformed it into the best. They had taken hate and made it into love, slavery into freedom, despair into hope. And in doing so, they had created something that would last forever, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome, to endure, and to love. Their story ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with separation but with reunion, as Sara joined Emmett in whatever comes after this life. And their legacy lived on in every descendant who carried their blood, in every person who heard their story and was inspired by it, in the very land they had worked and loved and passed down through the generations. It was a closed ending, a complete ending, an ending that satisfied because it reflected the fullness of lives well lived. Sara and Emmett had started with nothing but hope and courage. They had faced down evil and won. They had built a family, a ranch, a community. They had loved each other completely and raised children who knew what real love looked like. And when they died, they left behind a legacy that would continue for generations, a living monument to the power of love to change the world. The story of the woman who was branded by the man who owned her contract, and the cowboy who tore the paper and burned it, was ultimately a story of freedom. Freedom from bondage, freedom to love, freedom to build a life on one's own terms. It was a story that honored the best of the human spirit while acknowledging the worst. And it was a story that ended exactly as it should, with two people who loved each other deeply living out their days in happiness and leaving behind a legacy of love that would never be forgotten.